You ever feel so obsolete that no one cares about you? Well, meet Danganronpa 1's React mechanic. Yeah, remember that? When you look back on your favorite Danganronpa game, why was that one your favorite? A lot of people would say the different cast of characters or how the story was set up in those games. But how many of you would have said because of the tone of the game? I'm sure everyone who said yes to that answer, their favorite game is Danganronpa 1. So I'll be talking about Danganronpa 1 and why in my opinion it stands in a different category compared to the other games in this series.
Let's do this.
The reason the tone of Danganronpa 1 is so important within its story and characters is because of how they want the player to feel throughout the game. They want you to feel the pressure that these characters feel, or how the game's setting feels so much more claustrophobic than the other games. As you, the player, are constantly thinking of what it looks like outside. Has something bad happened outside, or is it normal like in the photos that Monokuma teased throughout the game? Questions like these help build more mystery for the player to indulge in, which can't be said for the other games. Yes, they had exciting moments and mysteries, don't get me wrong. However, not being able to see outside at all is pretty huge. Having no sunlight for these characters increases their chances for depression or insanity, if that wasn't already there. Which brings me on to another point, which is the realism in this game. Yes, I know, Danganronpa is not the most realistic game out there. However, you can tell that this game tries to be more realistic than the other two games in this series. Looking at the characters, and I'm not saying that these characters are more realistic than the others, however in this game we don't have characters that have lightning bolts flying off their eyebrows, or even robots. So to me, when it comes to the cast of characters from each game, it feels like Monokuma is the only silly / cartoony entity in this game, by the way he enters a room, or just by the way he talks. That's his character. While in the other games, it feels like the entire environment is that way, which only makes sense once you beat the game. And again, I want to stress this, that I'm not trying to devote the other two games, because I know some people will say that. Danganronpa V3 is my favorite game of all these. But when you compare these games and the environment to them, it really feels, in my opinion, like a different game. Keyword being almost. Now on about the motives. So, Monokuma's motives in the first game seem much more closer to the characters, with the exception of Chapter 3, which was a greed motive. In Danganronpa 2, we had motives that felt like Monokuma was forcing them to kill, like the Despair Disease or the Strawberry House for example. However, in the first game, we got motives like secrets or seeing family members. I mean, one of the motives was straight up just telling everyone who the spy was. And just like I said earlier, these motives for the second game make sense for the ending and make sense for everything else within the game. So I'm not trying to devalue it at all. But you can really see that in Danganronpa 1, the motives were a lot more personal to these characters. And yes, I do know that these did happen in the other games as well, just like Danganronpa V3's second motive. However, in my opinion, Danganronpa 1's felt a lot more threatening to the characters, not just the player. My main example being in Danganronpa 2, Chapter 5, the motive for that chapter was Kameda blowing up the island, which yes, that is very threatening to the player. However, for these characters in Danganronpa 1, their motives felt a lot more threatening to them than it did for the player. I'm sure if in Danganronpa 1, if we had a motive similar to that where someone was going to blow up the school, I felt like a lot more tension would have happened for the player rather than the player and the characters. Hopefully that's making sense, probably not, I don't know. And this also brings me to Distrust, the beta of Danganronpa. Distrust was pretty much a darker and depressing Danganronpa, even though Danganronpa is already dark as it is. The game went through a lot of changes, and seen by the art style they were going for, it was going to be a lot more brutal and real than the Danganronpa 1 we know of. There was also going to be a mechanic where the player's choice would depend if a character dies or lives within their playthrough, which would mean that each playthrough would be different every time. There was even a time limit, giving the player a lot more stress and anxiety with only 7 days to complete the game. The project got scrapped after a 2-year development cycle, despite having good feedback with Japanese gamers. The reason the game's cancellation was because of how gruesome it was. Being on the PSP with this style would lead to a lot of low sales, and they knew that themselves. They knew that the game would not be good for marketing with how gruesome it was, and on a console that not a lot of people owned at the time. So in a way, you could say that Danganronpa 1 was so much more realistic and gritty that it had to be toned down. And you can definitely see some parts carry over to the final game. And the characters, oh boy. So, the characters look just depressing and not interesting at all, in my opinion. The colourful and unique character designs that we're used to in Danganronpa were just not here. Imagine in Danganronpa V3 where every character was in their pre-game outfit the entire game. That would be really uninteresting and terrible. I mean, I like the outfits, but like, the whole game? I'm glad this didn't carry over to the final game because these were not as good as we got. I mean, just look at Monokuma's original design. Yikes. And now, in order to squeeze this video to 10 minutes, I'm gonna have to talk about the different chapters from the first game. You know, I gotta earn those mono coins somehow. First impressions are always everything, and the first impressions that this game gives are a lot more real than the other games. It starts off with introductions a lot sooner than the other games do, which gives the player a feeling that these characters have just been kidnapped. It's not like the other games where you get to choose who you talk to or go in different directions, while here you have to stay in the same room and talk to everybody. Like I mentioned with the motives, the first mode is pretty good to set up the player with, showing how much the characters can break within seconds if messed with, the motive being who's the most important person to that character, and because of this you can really see how much Sayaka, a character that sticks by you the entire first chapter, gets broken so easily. The murder is pretty easy to figure out. I'm sure it's most likely done to ease the player within the game, so it's being done for the sake of the game, just so the player can progress and move forward. Chapter 3 is where the realism kinda drops off and gets a bit wacky. Nothing wrong with that at all. However, it can be a bit jarring at first, and just by seeing different reactions online, it catches a couple players off guard. The big ones being Taka's change and alter ego. Taka powers up, I'm not really too sure how to explain this, but basically his best bro dies, he sees him again through alter ego, he becomes Super Saiyan. And alter ego seems even more odd having a fully capable AI that acts the same as the user who created it. It's pretty out there for inventions, however by this point I'm sure the player wouldn't see it out of place, considering Monokuma and his whole existence. He's just a giant hunk of advanced machinery. Chapter 4 brings a real split between the cast after Sakura gets outed as a spy that was working for Monokuma. To me, I think it's more important in this chapter that the main focus is the split between the characters rather than Sakura being the spy herself. Yes, it was very important, and it was a shocking moment for a lot of people. However, I feel like the split between the characters is a lot bigger, because it breaks their trust and their confidence in the game. And at that point, it's just what Monokuma wants in the game, for them to split up and stop working together. Yes, earlier in the game there was a couple people like that, however now it's 3 on one side, 4 on the other, with one of them falling short.
You're a poopy head. When we spell it out, you're a poopy.
And finally, the ending brings it all to a close with the mastermind and the outside world being revealed. It answers a lot of the players' questions, with one of the big ones being, what does the outside world look like? Funny enough, we don't even get to see it at the end of the game, it's just a bright light, we don't get to see it. Oh, no, well, there it is. However, I'm pretty sure they didn't show anything because of a sequel which explains why Monokuma was talking at the end of the game. There is no canon reason for this. I'm pretty sure they only did this so they could say, oh, we're gonna make a sequel. Hopefully, everything I've said can show you why I put Danganronpa 1 in its own subcategory of the Danganronpa series. Even though it's my least favorite in the series, it's still an amazing game, and when I first played it, I got hooked to the point where I would play for hours all day, just because of how invested I was in the game. And I'm glad that each of us in the community can hold these games close to us and just show everyone how passionate we are towards the series. I don't think much more needs to be said, to be honest. However, these memories that Danganronpa have given us, it's truly special, and that's why I can appreciate Danganronpa 1 so much. And also, Danganronpa 1 brought us this.
Go ahead, Makoto. Tell them who it was. Makoto, can you tell us what they were?
I think that's all that needs to be said.